We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
As the great sci-fi novelist once wrote about Forever Wars, it seems that these things just continue through infinity. Now, we've seen in the last couple of years two new wars that, while the United States is not directly involved in them, is certainly acting as though it has skin in that particular game. Now, we're going to talk about those today, the new Forever Wars, with somebody who knows everything there is to know about national security and has great insight into motivations in this field. And that's Dave Patterson. Thanks for being here, Dave.
Thank you, Mark. Happy to be with you.
So, Dave, let's talk about these two new, what seem to be Forever Wars. Because when we talk about Forever Wars, we think that the 20-year wars with Afghanistan. But what's happening now really does have the possibility to turn something that lasted even longer than that. And although the United States isn't boots on the ground, as it were, the United States is involved. We look at Ukraine, and you have Joe Biden talking about a 10-year security agreement. Well, surely that if that's the only negotiation towards an ending of the war is a 10-year security agreement, doesn't that mean that it's almost certainly going to last at least 10 years? And aren't we just laying the groundwork for a permanent state of war in quite an Orwellian fashion, I might add? What's your take?
Well, actually, I think that's right. And it all stems from the fact that when you start a war, or you start to engage in supporting hostilities, it would be a good idea if you had an end state in mind. What does winning look like? This has been the significant failure of the Biden administration in every single geopolitical engagement that they have engaged in. It is the single biggest flaw in their thinking. If you do not have some idea of what you want to see at the end, and you start working toward that, I mean, it's just common sense. When you start an assembly line, you would really like to know what's going to come off the other end. Will it be a car, a toaster, or a spatula? If you don't know what that is, how do you ever begin, and how do you work the process to get there? And this is where we are with the Biden administration. They are clueless about what it is that they want to see at the end. And the longer they are procrastinating and fidgeting and worrying about escalation, the more obscure and vague the end state becomes. If they had dealt with this, now it's always great, hindsight is always great, but at the time people were saying these very things. You need to stop the Russians from building up their forces on the border of Ukraine. They did not. In fact, when you had the big summit in 2021, June of 2021, Biden talked with Putin, and when he came back, he stopped all of the lethal aid to Ukraine. Now, just a second. What kind of thought process did that? And what it ended up being is the opportunity for Putin to say, well, yeah, we get this. So he put 20,000 more people on the border. And then in November, when they finally figured out that being nice doesn't work, then they started back with the aid again. But by then, I mean, it was over. It was too late to do anything. And then you have what's going to be a forever vexing encounter with China and the Taiwan Straits. We don't do what is necessary to convince China that, you probably could attempt to invade, but it would be so disastrously costly to you that it would not be a good idea. So that you have one actual kinetic problem going on in Ukraine, you have a potential problem going on in the Straits of Taiwan, and the same feckless. We don't know what the end looks like. We have no strategy. Approach is being used in both, and that guarantees a protracted challenge.
You see, I think you're absolutely right here, Dave. There doesn't seem to be any sort of end game at all for the biggest non-principal player. So it's clear what Ukraine wants. Ukraine wants its territory back from Russia, and I figure this will probably end up, if this ever ends in this forever war. There's an oxymoron there, I guess. Is that they want as much of their territory back as possible and guarantees that no further incursions will take place into the is it the Donbass region?
Yeah, the Donbass and Luhansk region,
yes.
Right.
Russia
and Crimea.
And Crimea, of course. Russia wants to finalize the keeping of Crimea, and it wants at least some sway over the contested areas, Donbass and Luhansk. And so their goals are clear. But then you have the international community that is very much involved in a war for the first time, really, that they're involved in a war without actually being involved in a war. And I think it's almost you've heard of Munchausen by proxy, where somebody
absolutely,
pretends to be ill.
In fact, I've used that analogy, right?
Yes, yeah. So yes, they pretend that a close family member is ill, so they can then reap the benefits of being the martyr for the cause. Yes, you've used that analogy in your writing, absolutely. And it seems to me that that's what the US is doing. Well, not just the US, the entire international community. They're saying, we're going to fight this war. We're going to win this war. We can't let the forces of evil do what they want and trample democracy. No, we're not actually going to go there. No, we're not going to do that. No, it's going to be the taxpayers' generous donations that we keep funding so other people can die. And that strikes me as a very bad way to try and extricate from a war, which leads us again to the original question. There is no end in sight as long as the largest principal actor who isn't involved is determined to essentially milk the situation for as much political credit as they can without committing troops, which I don't think they should do, by the way. Just my personal, I don't think anybody outside of the main acts should commit troops, but they want to do as much as they can without committing troops so they can adopt the persona of a wartime leader. And so there's no benefit for the international community in this conflict finishing, or am I completely off base with that?
No, I think you're right. But to carry the Munchausen by proxy metaphor, it's worse because the perpetrator actually causes the illness in order to come in and provide the remedy. And this is what's happening because of the just feckless approach that the Biden administration has taken. First of all, I mean, it's almost one event per week throughout this entire, episode. First of all, Ukraine asks for MiG-29s to replace their MiG-29s that are being shot down. Poland says, we'll do that. Blinken says, good idea. I green light that proposal. Austin says, not so fast. We're not going to do that. It might escalate the war. Excuse me. The fact that you didn't do that escalated the war. Well, and tick them off. Patriots, ATACMS, M1A1 tanks. They procrastinate, saying, "Oh my gosh, it's going to escalate the war," and then they give in and provide what was needed. This is not the way you fight a war. And if you have any intention of coming out with even close to what you had hoped for, if you had something to hope for, this is not the way. This portrays the West as indecisive, cowardly, and with an inability to understand what's going on. And it opens the door for China, who comes in and says, why don't you let us help you negotiate, just like they're doing in the Middle East. And when they come in, you're cut out, West. And so it just substantiates everything that our enemies and those who would be enemies think about the West.
Dave, it seems that you're right, that this is certainly not the way to prosecute a war that you hope to win, but it is almost a way to guarantee that the forever war dollars will keep flowing. Dave Patterson, thank you ever so much for being with us.
Thank you, Mark.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.